So I'll just explain why there's a consultation in the first place, which are, about debt increasing and the risks of commercial property investment. So what is the PWLB aiming to do? What's its proposals to affect? What's it proposing?
Well, one of the key things is obviously the restriction on access to Public Works Loan Board if authorities are undertaking debt for yield activity. And this is a real concern for us. I'll come on to the implications of that in a moment. But the flip side is a proposed reduction in the margin for everyone else. And this is a controversial issue. It splits opinion across local authorities. But we do find that there's a lot more that aren't undertaking debt for yield activity than are. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of excitement in the audience over the topic. But the proposal is, yes, a lower rates, but there's also other things in the consultation, including extending the settlement time from perhaps from the current T+2 to perhaps T+5. And also maybe restricting the amount that any authority can borrow at one time as well. So it's quite wide-ranging. There's 40 questions in the consultation, and it's significant for the sector.
Yeah, obviously, PWLB put its rates up in October. You can see that on the chart below. The sort of a steady falling red line, and then a big spike in it last October as 1% or 100 basis points added to the rate. You've been talking to the Treasury, Dave. We're hoping that's going to come back down to where it was before, are we?
Yes, obviously Treasury keeping their cards close to their chest. We would hope it comes back down to around gilts plus 80. There's some debates amongst the team as to whether we come all the way down to that type of level. But Stuart, I think we've got a slide on slide 2 showing current PWLB benchmarks. So if we think, well, where are they going to pitch this rate? We're currently showing PWLB certainty rate at gilts plus 1.8%. The best rate you can currently get from the PWLB is the local infrastructure rate, the LIR, which is down at gilts plus 60. So logic would suggest the new reduction in rates could be pitched somewhere between those two levels. We would hope it would be closer to the HRA rate at gilts plus 80. But I'm sure the Treasury will be looking at the market benchmarks, the Greater London Authority Transport for London, the Municipal Bond Agency issue bonds that trade around gilts plus 80 to maybe gilts plus 110, 120. So gilts plus 1% targets for those that reduction in PWLB margin, but that is huge. That's 80 basis points off rates. Rates are very low at the moment. Most of any PWLB loan is made up of HM Treasury's margin, and we're expecting these reduction in margin to exceed any increase in underlying gilts over the next 6 to 12 months. So really something to look forward to in terms of margin reduction if you can access the rates.
Yeah, and hopefully they'll bring it in sooner than later. It's one of the questions in the consultation is when should we make the change? I don't see anyone going to say, oh yes, let's delay the change for 6 months or a year. I think it's a slightly odd question. Surely everyone wants the discount as soon as possible.
Well, yes, you would think so, David, but of course we have had a delay to the consultation, but understandably we know our clients have been very busy fighting the pandemic.
Yeah. I mean, obviously the discount will be good, and this is for, if you like, people that PWLB classes as good borrowers. I'm really concerned about the people who PWLB says are bad borrowers. And so they brought in this idea of a debt for yield project. Clearly borrowing for commercial property is the most obvious example, but they've but
what
clearly
do you debt for yield, David?
Well, I mean, the consultation gives some examples in the background as to what is covered by it. So, but clearly there's a fine line between what's regeneration and what isn't. You know, buying a commercial property in your town centre to do it up is probably good in Treasury's eyes. Buying a commercial property in your own town centre just to keep the same tenants there and nothing's changed except a change of landlord is probably a bad thing. But you know, there'll be projects which are part and part, no doubt. I certainly don't think HM Treasury wants to build up a big pool of staff in its office to determine these things and to be questioning authorities. You know, it seems very clear from the consultation that it will be the Director of Finance who's responsible for signing off that the project meets the PWLB's criteria. But I think we need to be clear, they're not only stopping you borrowing for commercial property at the low rate, they're going to say, because it's difficult to allocate funding streams to particular projects, you know, clearly they say, well, if you didn't buy the commercial property, then you would have the money available, maybe your capital receipts, you say you're spending on commercial property, you'd use those capital receipts for service projects instead. So the idea is that if you have debt for yield in your capital programme at all, then you will not be able to access the PWLB in that financial year. I think that's the key proposal for this. So it's clear it's not stopping borrowing for commercial property, it's stopping you accessing the PWLB at all if you plan to buy commercial property or any other borrowing to invest type scheme.
Yeah, that's pretty brutal, isn't it? That's a fundamental pillar of local authority credit, the availability and access to public works loan board funding. And sort of playing devil's advocate, I think Treasury have played their hand very well on this. They obviously couldn't have kept the rate going at gilts plus 80 and then suggested the consultation about increasing the rates, because that would clearly have led to an avalanche of pre-funding. So they put the rates up and then consulted on bringing it back down again. But I've spoken to the Treasury. They're well aware of how other investors and the alternative lenders to local authorities will view access to public works loan board as a lender of last resort and the credit quality that brings. And they will know that reducing or prohibiting access to public works loan board will make it very difficult for authorities to get funding elsewhere.
Yes, and I think there's two things. In our consultation response, we've said they shouldn't stop lending as a lender of last resort, but they should just not give the discount. And this sort of takes us back to those of us with long memories will remember when there were PWLB quotas, and you had quota A and quota B, which were at different rates. But even if you wanted to borrow outside your quota, the PWLB acting lender of last resort capacity would make non-quota loans. And I believe they were 2% higher than normal loans. You know, so the PWLB is not forcing local authorities to go illiquid, to default on their payments because they can't get any cash from anywhere. But at least it's making it a sort of a last resort rather than a first resort type loan. But without that, you know, I guess they're hoping that if they do really cancel borrowing completely for debt for yield authorities, that no authority will dare be a debt for yield person. So that will just come straight out of the capital programme. I guess what that doesn't stop is people buying things when they're not in the capital programme. And clearly, yeah, we've known that's happened before at some authorities. You back, Dave?
Sorry, I am here, Dave. Continue if you would.
Cool. I'll carry on for a bit. I mean, we got a question come up. Should you load all your debt for yield borrowing for March and therefore only be blocked out for the month? I mean, the Treasury is hoping that people are going to, that, you know, you only conduct projects that the council has previously approved in the capital programme. So that's how it would work. So if you have a capital program that says something you're blocked out for the whole year, and they're assuming that people's capital programs are approved before the year starts. But I guess so they can add questions. There are a few questions that PWLB asks, such as, are you borrowing within the terms of the circulars? What's your authorised limit? They can add to that. What is the project for? And they've already outlined a few categories of what the loan would be for: the service spending, for housing, for regeneration, for refinancing, and then debt for yield. Tricky. I don't think it's going to be easy for Treasury to get this correctly, and they're going to rely on quite a lot on local authorities being honest and certifying correctly.
I think that's a good point, David. And it's interesting in how they've introduced the new housing revenue accounts, housing loan rate, which is very simple. And they're just asking authorities to confirm that the loan is for housing expenditure, and you get 1% of the normal rate, or of the certainty rate, which is fantastically straightforward. But they have said there will be penal penalties in place if local authorities have borrowed and the loans are for housing purposes, and that would be premature repayment, immediate repayment, which come with eye-watering premium because of the nature of the new loan and repayment rates. So that would be really tricky if authorities found themselves in that situation. So I think there are problems around making sure you're not going to contravene debt for yield and not subsequently going to be asked to repay loans at a later stage. But I agree with you, there needs to be a simple system, and I think the Treasury will be relying on the integrity of Section 151 officers. But already I'm having discussions with authorities that are looking to push the boundaries of those interpretations and suggesting they will continue their activity. We've already had one question raised on the potential to refinance with local authority or borrow local authority funding, for example, in the short term. In a year, you're prohibited from borrowing from the Public Works Loan Board, then subsequently refinancing a year later.
Good morning. Hi. Yeah, you okay?
Treasury has said that that's activity shouldn't happen and isn't allowed, but I think it's going to be hard to stop that. What do you think about that, David?
Well, yeah. So the Consultation talks about refinancing will still be allowed, and it acknowledges often it's difficult to say what the loan was originally used for. Clearly, sometimes that will be more obvious than others. The length of the loan, in particular, and if the majority of your borrowing is for commercial property, then presumably the majority of your debt, when it matures, was for that. But yeah, I think it's not simple. The Consultation has highlighted how Treasury doesn't really understand local government finance, because they wanted you to explain your capital programme and classify your capital programme into regeneration, housing, other expenditure and refinancing. And obviously refinancing of debt is never part of the capital programme, it's just part of the financing of the programme. So, I do worry a bit that Treasury will come up with a solution that isn't right for how the local government framework is.
Yeah, I think you might be right, and I'll agree with you on that. But one thing that I think the Treasury do understand well is the markets, are the alternatives, the rates, and to some extent how creditors and local authority investors do view the sector and view government support.
Yeah, so as I said, I suspect if the Treasury does come out with rules just like the Consultation proposes, I doubt any or very many authorities at all would want to be classed as debt for yield and have their access removed. So, maybe it is quite clever. But it brings up, so there's got a question from Martin in Birmingham. there's two things I can think of here. What about capital expenditure on existing commercial property? You know, possibly commercial property that wasn't financed from debt in the first place, but now the roof needs replacing. Does borrowing, is borrowing for commercial property? Will that ban you from the PWLB for a year? And then what about selling of existing property and using that capital receipt to buy new property? You know, it's good practice to manage your portfolio of property. These may be properties that have been acquired over many, many years in the past, you know, not part of the recent rush. You know, I think it would be odd if you weren't allowed to sell poorly performing property and replace it with good property. Yeah, how are people going to fund their revenue budgets if they can't do that? So, I don't know. It's odd.
I think that is a good response there, Dave. I think there's a lot we don't really know about that is going to be difficult to interpret and to enforce and police as well. So there's a lot of grey areas. There's grey areas on the timing and the extent of the reduction. It does make planning very difficult, but it does seem sensible to delay long-term borrowing at the moment, given the potential magnitude of the reduction in rates available for those authorities that are planning debt for yield. But I agree with you. I think this does sort of almost completely shut the door on debt for yield funding, unless there's a viable alternative bring funds that come in, and it seems difficult to envisage how that will happen at a rate that's going to work for a lot of these types of projects that are already running on quite skinny margins.
Yeah, I mean, if people are shut out from the PWLB, you know, what can they do instead? Are there realistic alternatives?
Yeah, I think it's difficult. We've already seen, we have regular discussions with investors, and they hate debt for yield in the main. They really will ask what the project is. It's one of the first questions. What are you funding? Is it commercial property? And if that's the case, they're saying, well, this isn't supported by central government. And local authority credit strength is all about government support. So why are we going to plough our money into these authorities and these projects when the government won't? And then look at the projects and see the risk and the reputational risk as well. So there's certainly in the private placement markets a reluctance there. Maybe a slightly different picture in the public bond market, but I think that could harden over time, and it would be interesting to see what the rating agencies make of any authority that's conducting debt for yield, and indeed, you know, it'd be interesting in your views, David, on the impact on the municipal bond agency of members that potentially don't have access to Public Works Loan Board.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Obviously, the NBA got a loan away or a bond away on behalf of Lancashire County Council. That was only a 5-year bond, but with a margin of 80 basis points, and it's still sort of trading about there. That's this gold line on the chart on the screen in a minute. You know, I guess it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? You know, cutting some people out from PWLB means they need alternatives that could boost the MBA. But you know, how do the bond market feel about having bonds guaranteed by authorities that haven't got the access to the cash to make good their guarantee? You know, that can be a negative. But of course, if PWLB does cut its rate back to 80 basis points, you know, is the MBA really going to be able to issue loans below that? You know, you might hope that a joint guarantee from multiple authorities might be better than a Lancashire only guarantee, you know, a single name only guarantee. But, you know, I think a margin on a 20-year bond will probably be higher than the margin on a 5-year bond. So I still think the municipal bond agency will struggle to get below 80 basis points.
I think you're right.
And yeah.
I think that is going to be the issue, and Public Works Loan Board is so easy. But also, I think it's the Treasury stated intention to be the primary lender to local authorities. It's easy for them to keep borrowing in-house, if you like. If you look at examples like housing reform, where they were able to go out and reduce debt levels, buy back debt from local authorities with great ease. If that's funding is mainly coming from the other sources or bonds, it becomes much more difficult to do that. So they do want to remain competitive, and that's why we think those bond benchmarks are useful benchmarks when we're talking about the potential for lower rates at or around gilts plus 100. I think that's where they will be targeting to keep funds and to keep local authority loans within the family. A question for you, David. You're going to love this one. We've not rehearsed this one. How would local authorities view their peers that lose access to PWLB funding in the local to local markets? I mean, what do you think the implications for credit there are?
Yeah, I think, presumably, PWLB currently publishes a list of people who have access to the certainty rate. So we're assuming there'll be a public list of who's been blacklisted, or you'll be able to work it out by the people who aren't on the approved list. So I think those names will become known, who's not been allowed access. I think local authorities looking at lending within the sector will be cautious about lending to people. One of the great views about credit quality of local authorities is that they can always repay your loan, because at worst they can always get a loan from PWLB to provide the cash to repay your loan. It's very much about cash flow management as much as it is about insolvency risk. And we think local authorities can't go insolvent, and B, we think they can't go liquid because of the PWLB. If strand B is taken away, that's a serious worry. But it's why I think it's important that when people respond to the consultation, we make how important the lender of last resort facility is. Even if it's quite an expensive facility, I think it needs to be there. That's probably the key concern for me.
Yeah, and that's one of the key points of our consultation response, that higher rate. It's in place for authorities that want to conduct debt for yield activity, rather than a ban on access. It's access, but at a higher rate. What would you call that rate, David? The yield rate, or the speculation rate, or whatever you want to call it? But at least there is a lender of last resort in that scenario, and the support and the credit quality of the sector is maintained.
Exactly. Is there anything else we think it's important for local authorities to focus on in their response?
Yeah, I think the changing of the settlement terms was an interesting one, wasn't it? We were asked in the consultation documents about moving settlement to T+5, but T+2 is handy, and we think, well, what sort of scenarios are there where you would need funds at short notice? And of course, we've had a recent example, the cash flow problems experienced by local authorities as they handled the COVID-19 pandemic. A great example of how you can require funds at relatively short notice and unexpectedly. So T+2 seems like something that should be preserved, and authorities should mention that in their responses. And then moving along to T+5 or longer just creates a bit more uncertainty, and would mean that authorities need to think more and focus more on liquidity and perhaps retaining more cash or access to cash. So we think that's an important one. And the question around whether authorities should be able to borrow in large size or be restricted from doing that was a difficult one. We were trying to think of the scenarios where authorities should be restricted. I mean, hopefully borrowing shouldn't come as a surprise to the Treasury. They request a lot of information in terms of the certainty rate forms and the proposals in the consultation about gathering more info on what authorities are borrowing for and how much they intend to borrow. But suddenly restricting an authority does cause difficulty, but I can see why the Treasury may need to do that. What do you think, David? I mean, we've got TfL in the market for PWLB now, and they represented about half of all the loans made to, from the PWLB last month. And can they go in and hoover up a lot of that available headroom? And should there be restrictions on individual authorities?
Yeah, I think it is difficult. Clearly, you know, there's such a massive size difference between local authorities. You know, you've got very big county councils and some of the larger metropolitan councils, and then PWLB lends down to parish councils as well as small districts and police authorities and the like. So, you know, clearly a 50 million a day limit, you know, is going to be far too large for some and a bit small for others. And then it doesn't stop you borrowing 50 million a day for every day of the week. So, and then are they going to put weekly limits or monthly limits? It sounds like an administrative nightmare, really. So I suspect it's something too difficult to do, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think you're right, but I think pushback from local authorities in the consultation responses on that will probably help reinforce that and preserve that facility. And you know, we do have authorities, for example, with large LOBO books. We don't expect LOBOs to be called for a very long time, but they could be, and that triggers an unexpected refinancing that could require quite a large sum to be drawn from the PWLB from individual authorities, and there'll be other examples like that as well. So useful to maintain that.
Yeah, good point actually, because some low terms you don't get very many days' notice before you have to repay. Yeah, so I guess that takes us back to the PWLB settlement terms. Yeah, if you suddenly find you've got to repay a LOBO in 2 days' time, but the PWLB takes 5 days' notice, yeah, that could be a problem.
Yes, it is a problem, and slightly related points. I remember going through the Aberdeen bond prospectus, and that does include covenants where the bond investors can call their funds back if the authority loses access to PWLB. So again, it just sort of reinforces how important access to PWLB is to local authorities and how it's viewed in the eyes of investors as well.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, it's just gone 10:30, so I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you all for listening. If you do have any more questions, please feel free to email us. We're always keen to discuss this. And those of you who are close clients will have seen our consultation response we sent around.
Yeah, and please get those responses in. I think we need everyone to get responses into the PWLB and Treasury to reinforce these messages and make sure that we have a good system going forwards. But thanks from me as well.
Brilliant. And just to say, we do post the videos of these on our website. So if anyone joined late or is dying to have a rerun, it will be available on our website in a day or two. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.